Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. It is our post-game podcast edition, number 9 on the season, and Penn State through 9 games, now at 3-6. It was quite the game, a back-and-forth affair late in this matchup between number 2 Indiana and the Nittany Lions, but ultimately a familiar outcome for Penn State, a 6th consecutive loss, 27-24. The Hoosiers get out of town at 10-0. It's Indiana's first ever win in Beaver Stadium, but it was much harder earned than anticipated. We talked about a 2-touchdown underdog situation for Penn State leading up to the matchup. All three of us on our pregame podcast pick Indiana to cover. Indiana did lead 20-7 midway through the third quarter via 13 unanswered points, but Penn State battled back, made it a 24-20 lead for the Nittany Lions in the final minutes with 17 unanswered points of their own. But ultimately, an Indiana victory, 27-24, touchdown with 36 seconds to left, a score that not many of us will forget anytime soon. Fernando Mendoza finds Omar Cooper Jr. for a touchdown. He got a toe or two in bounds, and that was enough for Indiana to pick up the victory. Daniel, we got a lot to get to. We're going to break it down, defense, offense, this team's mentality, what we heard after the game. But I think just to start, I was personally concerned about Penn State's motivation coming into this matchup. I was wrong about that, ultimately. I was concerned about this Beaver Stadium crowd's energy coming into today, and I think that was reaffirmed a little bit when we sat here and watched kind of during the pregame setting. It was quiet. The player introductions were quiet. But by the end of the first quarter, midway through the first quarter, this place really started to fill up, and I was wrong about that too. It proved to be a really quality game setting. I know fans want to see wins. I know moral victories are nothing no one wants to hug and wrap their arms around right now. I get that. But there was a true battle in Beaver Stadium today.
Yeah, I think that you think about our preview podcast, and we're talking about Indiana style points, like the fact that they're going to be out there to run it up and make sure that they can make an impression, on the committee, on people who might not believe in them. I think they still they still might have made that same impression on people who might be skeptical with how they ended that game. But yeah, I mean, I think that we saw a team come out that's not ready to roll over yet. I think that we were concerned about that. I think also immediately after this game ended, we were probably concerned about that, thinking about next week too, just given how potentially devastating this loss was. But after spending some time with the players in the locker room or in the media room, you came away feeling, I think you feel almost better about this team, at 7:50 p.m. on Saturday than we did at 11:30 a.m. today. And I think that a lot of credit goes to Terry Smith. A lot of credit, goes to these players. The one thing that I will say in terms of the atmosphere today, I think it's a good reminder that, a lot of people engage in fandom of their sports teams in a lot of different ways. And that the people that you hear on social media, I'm sure that, we love our subscriber base too, but that's a very, very small fraction, of Penn State fans, of people that are following this team. I think that, I learned another lesson similar to what I talked about the Washington game and the whiteout last year, when we weren't expecting that game to have any juice from the crowd, but they showed up. And so I think that that's a good reminder that, there's a lot of different ways that, people want to show support for their team. There's a lot of different ways that people want to root for their team or engage with their team. I mean, today would have been a beautiful day to, hang out in the lots this morning, come into the game. You might not be there right when it kicks off, but you'll get in there, have a nice day, and then, and root on your team. So I think that testament to Penn State fans too.
And something I had kind of forecasted a bit in my pregame prediction was second half as it got going, you're going to see an exodus in Beaver Stadium. People are going to return to the tailgate lots, finish their drinks, finish their food because the game is out of hand. And it started to maybe creep that way when it was 20-7. But to Penn State's credit, not only did they battle back to make it interesting, they took a lead into the final minute of this matchup against number 2 Indiana, a team that's now 21-2 since the start of last season. And Daniel, let's get into what Terry Smith had to say, because look, because of the end result, regardless of everything we just laid out and how it kind of exceeded our expectations, it was another punch to we'll go with gut for this conversation. It was a punch to the gut. And Terry Smith led off his opening statement by calling this a tough loss. He said, very, very difficult one to handle. These guys in the locker room are taking it very tough. He then went on to say how he feels awful for the players because they're doing everything that the staff is asking of them. And he talked about how much these guys are putting in the effort, have the desire. He also said we have to hit the reset button again tomorrow and continue to figure out how to win a game. Daniel, what stood out from Terry Smith's commentary? I think he was passionate up there in this post-game press conference. It's his third time doing this, his first time coming off of a loss at home, and we knew it meant a lot to him to get out there, lead the team out of the tunnel. This is his alma mater. He's been an assistant coach for 12 years, but it's his first time being at the front of the line when the team gets introduced to this entire crowd. And I think that passion resonated several hours later when we spoke to him in the post-game press conference.
Yeah, the one thing that one of the things I appreciated from what he said afterwards is he's talked about growing into the head coach role a little bit, and I think he dropped a little bit of third person on us where he said a Terry Smith team isn't going to quit, and I think that just showed his mindset. I think that his approach, I feel like maybe the way that he was in that post game news conference, I think that it might have been like maybe the most honest he's been with us, and maybe the most how he is with his players in terms of the interactions, the honesty, some of the things he talked about, the way he talked about a couple different things that I think we're going to get to. But yeah, I mean, we knew this was going to mean a lot to him, and we know that for the players, it meant a lot to them to do something, for Terry Smith. I mean, Keon Wiley on Wednesday night said that he was like, yeah, like Terry Smith has done a lot for me and my family. Like we owe it to him, to go out and win. I do know that there are some people, quibbling and on social media about, Terry Smith saying that, that he feels the team deserves a win, that these players deserve to win. And, people saying, well, like you have to earn it. Like you don't, just because you deserve something doesn't mean you get it. Like these players know that. I think Terry Smith, the most honest man, in that locker room, he probably knows it too. I think that that's a little bit more of a rhetorical flourish, given the emotional side of things. I don't necessarily think when you talk about what they did on the field, the mechanics of play-by-play, they probably would agree that maybe they didn't deserve to win. But I think that how this team has moved on, this team hasn't packed it in. I think that that's where he's coming from, and I think that showed in terms of how he was talking about the Nittany Lions post-game.
I think from Terry and from several of the players that we engaged with here on Saturday late afternoon was there was a kind of a tone of defiance, not necessarily about hey, you should feel bad for us, or hey, we deserve to win these games. It was more like, hey, I know a lot of you think that we're dead in the water right now, but we are still swimming. We're still going to keep trying our best. We're going to keep playing. We're going to try to put on a united front. And I asked Terry in post game, my question was about, it was really the best we'd seen of several of the senior members of this team. And you're thinking about where's the head of these senior players right now, a month left and less than a month left at this point in their college careers. Things have not gone well. A lot of these guys had never even experienced a losing streak until this season. Nick Singleton had his best game in Big Ten play. I think the same can be said for Denai Dennis Sutton and probably Zane Durant as well. And so I asked him, what have you seen regarding the team's effort and desire coming out of this game? And he referenced what I reported on Wednesday coming off the practice field after speaking with some fellow reporters. We had this conversation as well on the pregame podcast that it really felt like a pretty low energy situation in our brief look at practice on Wednesday. And Terry Smith in that situation, when I asked him on Wednesday evening, said, well, we felt like it was pretty fantastic practice. And a lot of the other periods probably exhibited that more than what you saw. And I believe Terry, and I said that in the pregame podcast as well. But he brought that up and he said, is that what you saw today? And obviously I was quick to answer, not today. And Terry Smith went on to say, these guys are busting their butt. He said, our best players, our old guys are leading the way. He said, that's why I feel so bad for them, because they're doing everything we ask. They're working hard. They're leading the locker room. They're making sure to set an example for the young guys. We've got to figure it out. He says, I'm not making excuses, but we played Iowa at night. Then we had the number 1 team, then the number 2 team. It was a tough road, and we're going to come back next week. We're going to fight harder. And like you said, he finished that answer with, no one will ever question if Terry Smith's team doesn't play hard. And I completely respect that. And I don't think that he was necessarily trying to get in my face about it, but I think he made a good point where, there was questions about the team's, wherewithal. And what did you see today, Tyler? And what did everybody out there see today? We saw a team that was ready and up to the task of competing. And even when they went down by 13, because I think that was the big question. If they go down, will they give up? If they go down, will they kind of roll over and let Indiana cruise to the finish line and clobber them down the stretch? No, they bounced back. They fought back. And let's get into some player commentary, because key to that rally was quarterback Ethan Grunkemeyer making his third career start. We'll get into some of the specifics on his performance, but he came out of the locker room and was among those players we spoke with in the media room. And he started with an opening statement. I think, Tim Tebow made a statement a long time ago after a loss. That comes to mind. But there aren't a lot of examples where a guy comes out and says, hey, before you ask me a question, I have some words to pass along. You wrote that up over at lines247.com for our first subscribers. What do we need to know about what Ethan Grunkemeyer said before any questions were asked?
Yeah, he echoed, I think, some of Terry Smith's sentiment where, he said, before we start, I just want to talk a little bit just about our team. And then he lays out that they played the number 2 team in the country, a top 5 offense, top 5 defense, Heisman contender, quarterback in Fernando and Mendoza. So, quote, just the questions about our buy-in as a team, I think right there, that just goes to show the commitment our team has. The guys in the locker room, that's just a testament to those guys, end quote. And then Mark Brennan followed up with him and was like, but why? Why do you feel the need to say this? Why do you feel the need to put yourself out front like this? And he said, quote, to let you guys know how I feel. We talked as a team after the game, and just the disappointment and people talking about, have they given up? And I think that just goes to show there's no quit with this team. It was on my heart, and I just want to say it, end quote. And yeah, I mean, I think that, there are some, we talked about it on the pregame podcast. We, posted about it on social media on Wednesday night, kind of where this team's head was at. But I mean, beyond just like the media and like the beat talking about this, I mean, all my mentions on Twitter, like it's all like, this team has quit. These guys got paid. Now they're lazy. On our message board, there's been similar sentiments expressed. And yeah, I understand.
It's a narrative. It's definitely it's a narrative that's out there. Absolutely.
And I understand the fan frustration with it. And yeah, like if you're a fan, like, yeah, like you get mad, like, yeah, like this is where your mind goes. But I think that, it's clear that, this team, has heard that noise, that they've seen this. I mean, I haven't looked at mentions or Instagram comments for guys, but yeah, like I'm sure that, if they post something that, might not be football related or, is NIL related or something that, there's people jumping on it and jumping on them because they've underachieved this year. And so I think that I think that they internalize that noise. And I do think that Terry Smith is someone that is probably very adept at channeling that. I do feel like that, sometime it was back and forth on whether James Franklin was trying to channel that, or, maybe if he was trying to, put Penn State, put himself above it, put it above it. But it's like, you guys know, we know that they hear everything that goes on, in that building. Like their antenna is up. It's not really a submarine sometimes from that respect. And so I think that this is a good coaching job, by Terry Smith to, whatever it was, whether they played our podcast in the pregame meeting room, or they, put some tweets up on the big board, or just what these guys have heard and everyone knows what they're hearing. I think Terry Smith was able to coach them up in a good way to, channel this into something positive. And I think that with Ethan Grunkemeyer, it shows that resonated, in a way with these guys.
Yeah, I will tell you, a lot of what we're discussing right now, I can see people rolling their eyes out there in the listening world and the viewing world, and I've passed along some of these sentiments. I know you have too, from what we heard in post game on the social media, and I'd say 75% of the responses are like, "A loss is a loss. Who cares? It doesn't matter if it's a loss." But isn't this better than the alternative? Isn't this better than it playing out how we anticipated, where if you feel like this team wasn't up to fight, this team didn't represent the Penn State brand the way you'd hope? And I think that there's something to be said for this. And to their credit, I kind of put the moral victory conversation on the table to a few guys in post game in the conversations. Trevor Pena, Amari Campbell, denied Dennis Sutton personally. I basically offered them to talk about the moral victory, and they didn't bite on it. They talked about how they were proud to fight together, and they were, that they were a team that wasn't quitting. And Denai Dennis Sutton was very forceful about that. But none of them said that this was good enough, or that they were satisfied with the result, or that they felt like it was a win despite a loss. And I want to get to Denai's quote real quick. He said, quote, "Coach Terry's done a great job of just emphasizing we are not quitting. You can't quit. You can't quit in life. And if you quit now, you're going to be a quitter forever." And I think Denai Dennis Sutton has been one of those guys, Daniel, who's kind of been in focus for a lot of people because they know he had a big payday to be back here at Penn State as a senior. There's been times in Big Ten play he has certainly not been at the level of impact that we anticipated. But that changed today. That was different today. I thought he played his best game since non-conference ball. Same goes for Zane Duran, as I said. I think you can probably look across the board, watch the replay of this game, pick up some stuff that we didn't see. The body language was good. The guys were feeding off the crowd energy. I think they were feeding the crowd some energy at times as well. And so I think the point that is really good to make here, because people don't get to see the players face to face like we do after these games. I didn't know what we would encounter going down, taking the stairs down from the press box and working our way toward there. I thought when Terry Smith walked out of there and the players walked in, we might see guys with welled up eyes, that looked like they just got done sobbing, that were going to be kind of not making eye contact with us and maybe talking around stuff or being short with their answers. That was not it at all. Those guys looked you in the eyes. They spoke with conviction. And I am a believer of something you said earlier. I do feel better about this Penn State squad, despite that 3-6 record at 8 p.m. here on a Saturday, than I did when I was walking into the stadium today. And when I did when this game kicked off. And again, they didn't get the win today, but there's a month left of the season. They're only 3 quarters. We're only now entering the 4th quarter of the season. If you go by the numbers, we're 9 out of 12. And I think that this team is up for the 4th quarter, and they're up to show some fight, and they're up to make Penn State fans at least be proud of the non-quit factor, because there's nothing worse than watching a team slide through the remainder of its schedule and clearly being in quit mode. I don't think that's happening right now, and I think we got a significant answer in post-game. Do you feel the same way I do?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the people have popped up on the board asking us, like, have you guys ever covered anything like this before? Like, is this the worst thing, that you've ever covered? And like, I was around that 2020 Philadelphia Eagles team that just like bottomed out, got Doug Peterson fired. And that was bad. Obviously COVID, everything on Zoom, just a, weird feeling to everything that was going on. But like, yeah, I covered Carson Wentz for 3 years, and you hear a lot of excuses when from someone like that over that period of time. I think that at that stage, like every post game, it was I got to watch the tape, I got to do this, I got to do that. Like there wasn't like, this is what's going wrong, this is what I need to do to fix it. It was like, oh, talk to me later. Like I'll figure it out. You talk about the moral victory thing. Like we've given guys the out. If they want to talk about that, yeah, it feels good to be, it's good that we're close, given how things have gone, but no one's expressed that at all. I mean, I think that's a very prideful locker room, and their pride has gotten pretty battered over and over again. I think not only with the losses, but we talked about how this team was affected by James Franklin's firing. And I think that these guys have done a very nice job of finding their footing and moving forward. I agree. Like that Denai Dennis Sutton quote, I mean, I think that really resonated with me a little bit, where if Terry Smith is in there telling them, like, if you quit now, like this is forever. I mean, I think that can it doesn't matter how much money you're making, it doesn't matter what's ahead of you. For guys that have this kind of pride, take themselves as seriously as they do, it's something that it can really, I think, get to you. And I think that if Terry Smith decided this week, like, I'm going to push that button, that was a really, really good button to push. So, I think that from that perspective, I mean, these guys, to I think a certain extent, are still really locked in on what they need to do and what they're trying to do. I think Terry Smith has done a nice job putting things out and motivating them. I think going off of this too, the one thing is that, like, there's the human element that comes with this too. Nick Dawkins was talking, and I'll have a lot more from him up on Lions 24/7. And he sort of got that, like, moral victories out. And he said that he's really embarrassed. That was the word that he used, that, embarrassing. And he's talking about his own play. And he's also talking about, the team and how the season has gone. I think that we've talked about him and the way that he carries himself. He's someone that takes a lot of pride in what he does, but he also is someone who brings a lot of perspective to it. He talked about having his dad die when he was 13 and seeing how much his mom was working, and I think he said, like, at that age, like, I didn't think I would be here. I thought I would be working at the factory in Allentown and having to work 3 jobs to, keep his family afloat. And now he's here. And so, and King Mac has brought up, the whys of why, all these guys keep coming back, why, they haven't given up yet what they play for. I just think that, there is a lot going on there, behind these guys. And, that's why I've said it on the board sometimes that, like, it's really hard for me to question effort. Like, I don't, I wouldn't feel comfortable, if someone, was sitting behind me for a, for, a game watching my work and question my effort when, they don't necessarily know, like, what does it look like? How is it supposed to be? There's so many things that go into it. So yeah, that's like that's a pretty wide ranging answer that I have to put one more coda on, because when you talk about the social media noise, what people are saying, all this stuff, Chaz Coleman didn't play today. He was ruled out, and everyone's automatically, that same thing popped up. Like, he's in the portal, he quit, whatever. Portal opens later. There's a lot of these guys where we have to sort some stuff out. I think that we've talked about it. Penn State needs Chaz Coleman back or whatever. But, he's on the sideline. He's in sweats, and he's looked like someone who wished he could be out there. He's pacing up and down. He's talking to his teammates. He's talking to coaches. Like, he's there. He's engaged. Like, I think that, I don't want to turn it into like some, diatribe about social media and, modern age and stuff, but like, there's a lot of elements going on. And I do think that we're here to talk about wins and losses. And this Penn State team hasn't shied away from that. The fact that they've lost 6 straight games, the fact that they are 3-6, that the fact that they were the number 2 team in the country, thought they were going to win a national championship, and are here. So I've been around a lot of teams that have made a lot of excuses, and I haven't really heard that from Penn State yet.
Something else that I heard from Denai Dennis Sutton about Nick Dawkins was that when he was addressing, it may have been Amari Campbell who told me this, they said that Nick Dawkins addressed the team in postgame and specifically addressed like the freshmen and the young components of the roster, and was like apologizing and just saying, like, this is not what the standard has been there. This is not what we've experienced over our careers here. And it's got me thinking, at 0-6 now in Big Ten play, that's more Big Ten losses than they had in the last 3 seasons combined. And so that's a great point, because there's a real thing here where you risk losing that culture that you established. I know it's going to be a new head coach, but these guys are prideful, not just about themselves, but you've laid a lot of groundwork. A guy like Nick Dawkins has been here for 6 seasons, and you do want to reinforce, like, hey, this is not the norm. Like, we have piled up a lot of wins. Maybe we've fallen short in some of those bigger matchups, but this is not the norm. This is not the standard. We've got to reverse course and not allow that to become the standard. And so I think now that we got a lot of the psychological components out of the way, which I hope many of you appreciate out there, we are going to get into what led to a loss. And the middle 8 was ugly. It's such an important part of the process for every game, and it's get harped on a bunch. But Indiana was able to get 10 points in the final 2.5 minutes of the first half. It was a 7-7 game before that. They got a short field goal. Penn State stood tall after an 8-minute and 30-second drive from Indiana that took 15 plays, but they only got 3 points out of it. That's kind of a victory if you're Penn State. But unfortunately, Katron Allen, for the first time, and as far as I can remember, fumbles the ball on a reception on a 3rd down. He wasn't going to move the chains. It was going to be a punt coming up, but instead, Indiana recovers. They're able to go down and score, and that makes it a 17-7 game going into halftime. You're thinking, okay, Penn State's really playing with a very limited margin for error now. And what do they do on their first possession? They get the first opening possession of that second half, and there's an interception from Ethan Grunkemeyer. And you're starting to think, okay, let's raise the red flag a little bit. Indiana held to a field goal in that situation, but 20-7 as a result of what happened there in the middle of the game. And Daniel, I think it was probably fair to wonder, did Penn State take its best swing in this game? Have we seen them take their best shot? And much like the Ohio State game went, does it start to just slip away from them in front of all of us?
Yeah, that was really my concern, especially when you think about the way that Indiana plays and what they want to do, and how, that felt like the opening where, okay, Indiana can just step on Penn State's neck now, that they'll break them, and then it'll be off to the races, and they'll get to 40, they'll get to that 14.5 point number from Vegas. But yeah, I mean, I thought that Penn State did a really, really good job responding. They let Indiana score on 4 straight possessions from late in the fourth quarter until early in the third quarter. Penn State comes out, gets the ball back out of halftime, and Ethan Grunkemeyer throws an interception. I think by the time Indiana kicked that field goal, they were out of the middle 8, but it was still that middle part of the game. And you're looking at the clock and you're thinking, it might start to get late pretty early here, for Penn State, especially given that, for Indiana, you had that 8.5 minute drive that ended in a field goal. And then after the interception, it was a 6-minute drive that went 37 yards and ended in a field goal. And that Indiana's got 2 pretty good running backs where they could really churn the clock and, really run things down. And Penn State didn't let that happen. I was pretty impressed with that. Penn State was able to score on 3 straight possessions, got them ahead. And I think that we were, pretty surprised that we ended up there, considering it was a 20-7 game, everything that's happened. And like we spent a lot of time talking about, our perception of maybe where this team's head was at.
And I think what stood out to me, it felt a little bit different, is when they held Indiana to field goals and bought their offense some time to rally. Because instead of it's 20-7, if you're looking at a 28-7 game, you can probably forget about it. And we've kind of seen teams rip off those possessions against this Penn State squad, run the ball down their throat a little bit. And Penn State, I would say, although it got blemished at the end in a significant way, this was probably the best defensive performance we've seen from Jim Knowles' unit since that overtime loss to Oregon, when it got away from them late. I think going, and then it's UCLA, and we all know how the rest has gone since then. But Indiana was coming off a game against Maryland with 370 rushing yards about. They had 108 rushing yards today. Both their running backs, very, very humble stats, 12 for 55, 12 for 32. These are guys who have racked up some big gains across the Big Ten this year. And so I thought that was good to see, and we'll get to more of the defense. But the passing game got vertical along the way to help Penn State dig itself out of this hole. Terry Smith was asked about it because it's been a major topic of discussion all season long. Terry Smith has been a little bit more reticent to discuss this in a public forum, I think, than James Franklin ever was, in terms of being like, yeah, we got to get more vertical. Yes, it's something I've been harping on, in our meetings with Coach Kodenlicky, and we didn't see it in either of the last 2 games. He's mentioned it in both of the last 2 post-game press conferences. And someone asked, what allowed you to throw the ball vertically down the field today? He gave 1-sentence answer to that. We made calls to throw the ball down the field. And so, hello, Andy Kotelnicki. But look, they got it done. Ethan Grunkemeyer, I thought, had clearly his best performance as a starting quarterback, but he was also given a longer leash to be a true quarterback in this scenario, not just someone who it feels like the staff is a little bit afraid to utilize him as a passer. In this spot, Trevor Pena woke up. 3 catches of 20-plus yards for Trevor Pena. One of them, what did he go for? A 43-yarder. He did not reach 20 total receiving yards in any of the last 5 Big Ten matchups. He had 3 catches that exceeded that total over the course of this afternoon. You saw our guy Kobe Howard get involved. He had a couple catches. One of them was a 22-yard pickup. You saw Nick Singleton scoring a 19-yard touchdown. That wasn't getting vertical, but it really opened things up for the rush game, as we'll talk about. And to me, it was confidence-inducing for this entire offense, for your young quarterback. And I'd imagine defensively, even though they aren't going to really crap on the offensive strategy to us in conversations, I'd imagine it was a bit of a weight lifted off their shoulders when they see, oh, look, our team can also complete passes down the field.
Yeah, so I just pulled up the advanced stats from PFF, and they have Ethan Grunkemeyer's average depth of target at 8.6 yards, which it was 4 yards at Ohio State. Like, yeah, that's just a marked difference of what we saw from them today. The willingness to throw downfield. I thought it was interesting. Ethan Grunkemeyer really harped on the receivers' ability to get separation and get open today, which we know that's been something that has come up a lot. But to have that kind of jump in your depth of target. I think that really does speak to a philosophical change, and and I think Terry Smith, sometimes the simplest answer is the best answer. Like you call those plays, therefore you're able to have those outcomes instead of not calling them and just eliminating that outcome. I think that we really saw it. I mean, Pena did a really nice job of getting open downfield. I know that, I make the joke or the quip where it's like, yeah, like you watch these other games and you see them, you see these teams do things that feels like we haven't seen Penn State do in a long time. That 43-yard throw and catch and run to Pena, that felt like something that I've seen other teams do, and I've seen when I've been watching other games these past couple of weeks, but we hadn't seen it at all from Penn State. So I think that you came away feeling, pretty optimistic from it. I know that Grunkemeyer, he missed Devontae Ross up the left side, in the final seconds of the game. That could have been a pretty big gain. Little high, little outside. Just kind of a tough miss right there. But I think that you came away, the way that he went about things, the way that he commanded it, felt like there were a couple plays where he held the ball too long. But you saw the step forward. I think Terry Smith said that he felt like that Grunkemeyer grew up a lot today. And I think I would agree with that in terms of it didn't really feel like we had the asterisk or the training wheels on the well, it's just the redshirt freshman who no one was expecting to play, who's in his third start. You felt in that fourth quarter where it's kind of like, yes, this is Grunkemeyer's team now. Yes, this is Grunkemeyer running the offense.
I mean, look, even with Drew Aller, a guy who had started 30-plus games, this wasn't much of a presence in their offense, except, as you've mentioned several times on post-game podcasts, when the backs are against the wall and you got to start throwing it deep against Oregon because you're down 17-3 in the fourth quarter. You got to throw a bomb to Devontae Ross because you're losing in the fourth quarter to Northwestern. But really beyond those moments, what I'm curious is, moving forward, do we see this kind of vertical attack happen on your opening possession or your second possession? Does it require you trailing by multiple scores to get that going? Because I think that's the next step where we need to see this offense go. But it was a step forward in that regard. And as I mentioned earlier, it really seemed to open things up for the run game. Penn State had 29 rush yards for the first three quarters. We talked about it coming into the matchup. Indiana, number one in the Big Ten, coming into Saturday, 80 yards allowed on the ground per game. Well, Penn State had 88 rushing yards in the fourth quarter alone after having 29 for those first three. Nick Singleton played a huge role. It's been a long time since we said that here on the podcast. 59-yard sprint for Singleton. He was stopped just short of the goal line. A couple plays later, he gets into the end zone. I mentioned he had a 19-yard touchdown. He had 3 touchdowns today. He's got 51 touchdowns overall. He's only 2 behind Saquon Barkley for total touchdowns in a Penn State career. These are the only 2 players, Barkley and Singleton, who scored 50 touchdowns in an Nittany Lions uniform. A bit of a reminder of the great moments that we have seen from Singleton over the course of his Penn State career. And afterward, in post-game conversations, Ethan Grunkemeyer said he went over to Nick Singleton after that run and said, "This is who you are." And so I brought that over to Nick Singleton when we had a chance to hear from him this afternoon. And I said, "Did it remind you a bit of who you are?" And he said, yeah, it gave him some confidence. That it kind of reminded him, this is what you can do. And so I've been saying, Singleton, you said it, Mark said it, sometimes a switch gets flipped with this kid and all of a sudden he's off to the races for a few games. You'd love to see him be able to finish out his senior year on a high note versus the slump that he has kind of endured throughout this season that no one anticipated as one of the marquee members of this team. He's got a chance to do that. 3 more games, not just good for Penn State's offense, but good for his NFL outlook, you would imagine. And so that was really important to see. I mean, when you saw, we saw this team throwing the ball down the field, you saw Nick Singleton running for 59 yards. It was like, wow, this is what we had imagined might happen this season coming in. And unfortunately, he had to wait till game 9. Nick Singleton, 16 yards was his longest run of the season through 8 matchups. So this was a significant step forward for number 10.
Yeah, that's just I think that's one of the other big developments coming out of today is that you think that Nick Singleton might be on track now, that maybe it's the thing where it's just as simple as breaking one off, feeling that like he is, and then, it's off and running. I think we're getting a little bit of a look into Grunkemeyer's on-field leadership a little bit with, going up to Singleton after something like that, after Pena's long game, they're running in the next personnel group, but Grunkemeyer is still in Pena's face, hyping him up. I think that it's, a little bit of Grunkemeyer has a little bit of the Drew Aller thing where, with us, can be a little flat, a little monotone sometimes, but then he's on the field and you're like, oh yeah, this kid's got an edge to him. But with Singleton, I mean, I think that it's the pass game and the run game can just play off each other so well. There's been times this year where it has felt like that Penn State treats it like the run has to set up the pass, and that's the only way that we can go about it. Whereas I think today you saw that pass can open up things for the run. I think both Grunkemeyer and Singleton said it, where the running lanes were there because they were able to hit on some stuff downfield. We were commenting on it where there was like a 3rd and 5 where the Indiana safeties are, I think, 10 and 12 yards off the line of scrimmage. On that downfield pass to Pena, that 43-yarder, I think both safeties, it was like a 3rd and 10. I'm pretty sure both safeties were just at the first down marker, just 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. Like, it felt like that Indiana was maybe going to dare Penn State to throw it over the top, to actually follow through on all these things that they've been talking about. And then once Penn State does it, suddenly things get a little easier up front. I think that's kind of that's a lesson you can take away, is that, like you said, maybe if you're throwing it deep earlier in the game, maybe if you're going to your whole playbook earlier on and not waiting until you're down by 2 scores or 3 scores or whatever it is, then maybe just everything can get easier over the course of a game.
When we look at the defense, I mentioned earlier that they had success in stopping Indiana on the run. I think that was very important to keeping this game manageably in terms of a comeback for the offense. But additionally, they were in Fernando Mendoza's face early and often today in a way that we just had not seen in Big Ten play thus far. And I know that you looked up some of the stats from PFF after the game. 25 pressures this afternoon against Indiana per Pro Football Focus. That's the second most of their season, behind only the Florida International game back in week 2. It's also easily their highest, 6 more than the UCLA game in terms of pressures. And I think they were at 4 against Iowa, a team that didn't pass the ball much. It was a low number last week against Ohio State. Julian Sayin was really comfortable in that pocket throughout the matchup. This time around, you got another Heisman Trophy quarterback in front of your face, and he's getting lit up at different points. It's not just reflected in where the sack total was today, but he was getting hit on throws that he was making. And to his credit, he was standing tall and taking those hits and delivering throws, and that down to the final wire, which we're going to get to in a moment. But that's a significant step. And dare I say, did Jim Knowles' defense find something today? I know they lost something at the very end of this game in the final 2 minutes with Mendoza driving down, but was this a step forward that we can actually say this is going to carry over for the rest of the season? Because it has felt for so long that it's been a bit of a rudderless situation, lacking cohesiveness on the defense and just really not making impactful plays. And whether you look at the pressure, whether you look at some of the results of that, King Mack sprinting to the sideline and snagging that interception and helping turn the tide and give Penn State a chance to take the lead, the defense made some plays along the way. And again, we'll talk about what they didn't do in the final moments, but this is a 60-minute football game, and there was a lot of it that you actually really liked from this defensive group, which we haven't been able to say a lot throughout the course of this Big Ten schedule.
Yeah, I mean, for 58 minutes, like, they were pretty good. I know that Indiana had the one long pass on their first touchdown drive, but I felt like that Penn State otherwise, they made it a grind. They made it, was it like 11 plays, 37 yards, 6 minutes? Like, they turned it into that kind of game. I'm sure that, I'll check the PFF stats when we're done, but I would assume that this is probably more than Penn State has blitzed in a while. Like, it felt like that you saw, like, King Mack was in the backfield a lot. Some of the other safeties were up at the line of scrimmage, a lot. Like, it felt like that. It was one of the games where it came in and it really felt like that Penn State had, a game plan that they really wanted to use. And I think it worked really well. I think that the one thing that we always hear about Jim Knowles is that he's going to tell the players to be in the right spot, and then they just need to execute. And today felt like that a little bit. It felt like they had, a good number of answers, and that they knew what they were doing in certain situations. So, I think that moving forward, I think that this is something that you can hang your hat on if for this defense. I think that maybe this is the proof of concept for that Jim Knowles system. Maybe we're not getting it in year 2. Maybe it's the final quarter of year 1 where we finally start to see some of the things that we've heard about come together.
Yeah, 2 years left on the largest defensive coordinator contract in college football. We know that do they push the reboot button? Do they retain Jim Knowles? Is this a fit for the next head coach? Well, you'd like to see some confidence-inducing performances, and it largely was today, until it wasn't. And by the way, Indiana 50-plus points the last couple of weeks on the season, number one in the Big Ten with 43 points per game. They had 20 points with less than a minute remaining in this matchup. But to their credit, and particularly to the credit of Fernando Mendoza, who was getting rocked during the final drive and facing pressure throughout, and was sacked by Zane Durant early in the series, he was able to march his team down with some help from some huge catches. And, of course, as I mentioned, one of the best catches that you'll see this season in any Penn State game, really in any Big Ten game, to win this contest by Omar Cooper, who got a toe or two down as he's getting pushed out of bounds by Zeki Wheatley on a pass where he had to go vertical and extend for it. But this was really Mendoza's drive. And this went from a game that felt like it could really be costly to Mendoza and certainly to Indiana in the national perception picture to maybe being a Heisman moment in front of Beaver Stadium crowd that was very much invested, trying to rattle him, a defense that had had success over the course of this game. And yet Mendoza was able to respond, have answers, and ultimately it led to Penn State's demise this afternoon.
Yeah, that last drive was really, really impressive. I have something up on Lions 24/7 about the defense faltering and what Mendoza did, and reliving that drive a little bit, in the stat sheet and some of the highlights on social media. Like it was surgical, and they did not lose their composure. There's like 3 different points where they really could have. You took the sack on the very first play, puts you back into 2nd and 17. And then, down when you get to the line of scrimmage or when you get inside, the 10, Ivan Kamaju breaks one up. King Mack, almost ends the game when he hits Mendoza and the ball pops up into the air and Amari Campbell slips trying to go get it. And for Mendoza each time to, get back down there, get under center, get the snap and make another play. Like, I think that's a testament to a really, really good quarterback. It was fun to watch him when he was on. Penn State didn't make it easy for him, but he also had a lot of help. Charlie Becker, who wasn't on my scouting report. Coming in this game. I mean, he had 2, really, really great plays. The first was in the first half when, King Mack, like in real time, it looked like a strip sack for King Mack when he gets around the edge, gets to Mendoza. But the ball, goes forward, pops up in the air, and Becker just boxes out Aldavian Collins for the conversion. And then later he goes up and gets a 17-yarder, jump ball with Collins, gets 1 foot in. It's 1st and goal at the 7. And that's not to mention he had a 53-yarder too. He was really, really good. He made the plays for Mendoza. And it was just one of those things where you talk about that first play when Mack, got to Mendoza, but it's still a completion. And then you think about Mack getting to Mendoza again at the end of the game, and it's there, like the ball's in the air. It's anyone's game, and Amari Campbell slips going for it. Like it's one of those things where it's like when it rains, it pours a little bit. When things aren't going right for you, like you're not going to get those little breaks, you're not going to get those little bounces. It's pretty tough. But Mendoza, just the resilience today was, I think, very cool to see. And I think one of those performances that, maybe Monday morning, maybe later tomorrow night, if you're a Penn State fan, you can be like, okay, that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'd imagine people in this Penn State community will have a little bit more attention on him moving forward as they've got, I think, Wisconsin and Purdue. They look like they're going to go 12-0 and then into the Big Ten championship and beyond. Probably a team that more Penn State fans will get on the bandwagon than an Ohio State squad. Not that you're rooting for anyone from the Big Ten, but I think there'll be a little bit of interest in this kid now that you've seen him up close and personal, and we got a glimpse of what he can do. And he did it without Elijah Surratt, who had 10 touchdown receptions through a 9-0 start. He was not available today. He was questionable, coming off a hamstring issue, I think, last week. Ultimately did not play, but Charlie Becker, a sophomore with 7 career catches, had 7 catches today alone, over 100 yards. And like you said, some highlight reel grabs. And it feels like back-to-back weeks where you knew more what to expect from those Ohio State guys and Tate and Smith, but you got receivers that looked all world today again for Indiana that you're dealing with. And whether that's a secondary thing or a Mendoza thing or a receiver thing, it just has not been a good formula for Penn State the last couple of weeks. I think it's also worth noting, because you talked about Grunkemeyer making a pressure and actually getting his hand on the ball and knocking that down during the final series. Jim Knowles kind of has taken a step in trusting some of his younger players, apparently, because in the final crunch time moments of this game, you saw Kamaju out there. We've gotten used to seeing him a bit more of late, but Alex Tash at linebacker for significant reps deep in the fourth quarter, and Darius Dixon, who didn't play at all in the last couple Big Ten matchups. He had a sack in this game. He was on the field down the stretch. Based on what I saw, none of those guys cost Penn State in a significant way. I could be wrong, but I thought that they kind of fit into the moment. And so that's also good to see, where the defensive depth maybe is something that they're utilizing a bit more in certain scenarios. And I think, just as we talk about the depth of this team, it was in a bad spot at quarterback. And every time I saw Ethan Grunkemeyer have to take off and take a shot and get hit by an Indiana defender, you're kind of crossing your fingers, because next man up certainly seemed to be Liam Clifford, as we discussed in our pregame podcast. He was the guy that was warming up as QB2 during pregame when there was breaks in the action. Him and Grunkemeyer were both tossing the ball to stay loose because he didn't have Jackson Smolik available today. He was out. Beckham Kritzer was listed as questionable, but he was not in the pads going through anything in pregame warmups, and so he was not involved. But ultimately, we did not see QB2. No reps at all for Liam Clifford. There was no secret sauce package there. And it was the Ethan Grunkemeyer show at quarterback. So just a few odds and ends there from a personnel standpoint. Daniel, before we close up shop on this postgame podcast and leave beautiful Beaver Stadium for the second to last time this fall, anything else to offer up before we forget to?
Yeah, I think that with those personnel usage notes, I mean, Indiana's second to last drive that ended with a punt, they ran with Dixon and Tash out there, for that. And then Tash was on the drive, the last drive when it started, on the big gain by the Indiana tight end, he got in a little bit behind Tash. That's something. He had King Matt coming over the top. I think that was just he got to the right spot and Mendoza gave him the right ball. And then the Liam Clifford thing, I kind of said it on our preview podcast, where I was just kind of like, don't worry about it. If you get, it's one of those things where I know that we're all in tune for the day-to-day thing. And it is it is a development. If you're, wide receiver 5 is going to be your QB2 for a game. But it's one of those things where it's they're not going to, I didn't feel like they were going to take the ball out of Grunkemeyer's hands and give it to Liam Clifford at any point during the game. So, I mean, every once in a while, I have to do this as a, Packers fan, Phillies fan. Sometimes you get really worked up about something and then you're like, wait, you go through the kind of the rationale I laid out. If you get to QB4, this is how things go. This is the point you're at. If you have 3 quarterbacks who are hurt, it's just what the game is. It's not a personal thing or, some affront to God that you're in this position. It's just how the game goes. Speaking from some personal experience there with my alma mater. But yeah, no, overall, I think just, leaving Beaver Stadium, they lost. I don't think that our coverage is going to, belie that factor, obscure it. But I do think that, you saw a team that, contrary to some of the narrative that was put out there by, some members of the fan base, some people that have pretty large platforms, this is a team that hasn't packed it up and gone away. I think that if you're a Penn State fan, I think that you should feel bad about the loss, and you probably do feel bad about the loss. But I think when you look at these final 3 games of the year, you see a team that, okay, maybe this is a team that I can get behind. Maybe this is a team that, I want to see play as much football as possible, because that's really why you're in this for. You want to see your team play. You want to see them do well. You want to see them play like they did today in terms of their effort and everything. So I do think that, you feel bad about the loss. I think that we still don't feel great about this team and still have a lot of reservations about how we ended up at this point. But I think that as we look towards this fourth quarter, like you laid out, this is a team that I think they're going to play their fourth quarter of the season like they played that fourth quarter today.
Take it from a guy who picked this team to go 12-0 this year. You can't be wearing the same lenses that you put on for game 1 right now in game 9, game 10, It's just not the same situation. It's not the same expectations. If you came into this game against Indiana thinking they needed to play up to your expectations on August 30th, you have lost track of the process. That's not where the team is anymore. And so, yeah, you need to be looking at the performance game to game to game. And today was a step forward in some significant ways. They put a jolt into Indiana. They had a lot of people tuning into the game, not just for, rubbernecking on the train wreck that is Penn State. No, people were tuning into this game because they said, okay, Penn State's maybe going to win this game and pull off an upset. At the end of the day, Indiana escapes with the win. It's weird to say that Indiana escapes with the win in Beaver Stadium where they had never won, and now they improved to 3-25 all time against Penn State in this series. But this is where we're at in 2025. We got 3 more games to cover. We're back here in Beaver Stadium in about 40 hours for Terry Smith's latest press conference, and another game week gets underway. The Land Grant Trophy, that big, beautiful, clunky thing up for grabs in East Lansing next Saturday. We'll do our best to set that stage for you. We'll get our fingers on the pulse of this team once again. We thank you for following us at Lions247.com, where you can find a bunch more from this matchup, including our report card from Professor Mark Brennan. We have a lot more stories about where this team is at, articles over on the site. For now, stepping aside, we'll cut back with another podcast episode on Monday afternoon. Big thanks to Daniel Gallen. I'm Tyler Donahue, and this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.